That's enough, old-timer. Get out of the way before you break a hip. This is a job for actual warfighters, not relics from the archives. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed in the sterile confines of the Tactical Operations Center. The small crowd of young, eager lieutenants and specialists surrounding Captain Valerius snickered, their nervous energy coalescing into a wave of casual cruelty. The target of their derision, Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, did not so much as flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the primary monitor, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. She stood with an economy of posture that some might mistake for weariness, but was in fact the profound stillness of someone who had eliminated every wasted motion from their existence. Valerius, puffed up with the unearned confidence of a man whose career had been a straight, unblemished line of peacetime promotions, took her silence as weakness. He snatched a heavy, black data slate from a console and tossed it dismissively onto a nearby table. It skidded, spun, and the corner of it clipped Rostova's helmet with a sharp crack of plastic on composite. The sound was small, but it landed with the weight of a thrown gauntlet. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Still, she did not react. She didn't rub the spot, didn't turn a glare, didn't offer a single word of protest. Her focus was absolute. But across the room, observing from the shadows near the entrance, the base commander, General Madsen, saw it. He didn't see the impact, he saw her stance. He saw the subtle weight shift, the way her feet were perfectly planted, a foundation of unshakable balance. He saw the ghost of a legend he thought had long since retired. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence in the comments below. Captain Valerius saw a problem. He saw a master sergeant who, by his estimation, was at least 2 decades past her prime, a bureaucratic fossil inexplicably assigned to his elite rapid deployment team for their final certification exercise. Her uniform, while clean, was faded from 1,000 wash cycles. The lines around her eyes were etched deep, not with the sharp intensity he associated with warriors, but with what he interpreted as the dull fatigue of a career spent behind a desk. He saw her slow, deliberate movements as hesitation, her silence as ignorance. His entire operational philosophy was built on speed, aggression, and overwhelming force, the loud, brash doctrine of a new generation. Master Sergeant Rostova was the antithesis of this creed. She was an anchor when he wanted to be a spearhead. The scenario is designated XR-7, the Gordian knot, Valerius announced, his voice booming with artificial authority as he gestured to the holographic schematic dominating the center of the room. Multiple hostiles, multiple hostages, non-permissive environment. The average success rate is 4%. My team has run it 3 times, and the best we've managed is a 38% casualty rate on the hostage side. The brass says it's unwinnable. I say they haven't seen us operate at full throttle. He shot a pointed glare at Rostova. Today, we will have no deadweight. Master Sergeant, you will take the Echo Overwatch position. It's a static support role. Just try to keep up with the comms and don't touch anything important. The insult was clear. She was being relegated to the simplest, most passive role, a spectator seat. The lieutenants shifted uncomfortably. Avoiding eye contact with the woman their commander was systematically humiliating. Rostova simply gave a short, single nod. Her hands moved to the simulation interface in front of her, her fingers dancing across the controls with a practiced fluidity that went unnoticed by the arrogant captain. She wasn't just logging in. She was calibrating, attuning herself to the system with an intimacy that was unsettling to the few technicians who bothered to watch. Her silence wasn't ignorance. It was preparation. It was the calm before a storm Valerius couldn't even imagine. He mistook the quiet of a professional for the timidity of a clerk, a fatal assumption that would soon unravel his entire world. The simulation began. The lights in the TOC dimmed, and the main screen flared to life, displaying a dozen different perspectives from the virtual battle space. Go, 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 Valerius roared into his microphone, and on screen, his team of digital avatars stormed the target building with textbook aggression. They moved fast, stacking up on doors and clearing rooms with a kinetic fury that was impressive to the untrained eye. But to the system, to the cold, unforgiving logic of the Gordian knot scenario, they were just a loud noise, a predictable variable. Within 90 seconds, the first casualty icon blinked red. A booby trap. 2 minutes in, a second and third icon went dark. A hidden machine gun nest they had failed to identify on their hasty approach. Valerius's voice grew tighter, more frantic. Damn it, suppress that position. Grenade out. But his commands were reactive, always a step behind the scenario's unfolding logic. The AI, designed to be adaptive and ruthless, was hurting them, controlling the flow of the battle, turning their aggression into a weakness. In the sterile quiet of the TOC, another drama was unfolding. Master Sergeant Rostova, from her static echo position, had not moved. Her avatar was perched in a dilapidated clock tower half a kilometer from the objective, armed with a simulated M210 enhanced sniper rifle. For the first 3 minutes of the engagement, she did nothing but observe. She watched the chaotic dance of friendly and enemy icons, her breathing slow and rhythmic. Valerius, his face slick with sweat, had forgotten she even existed. Then, her hands moved. It was not the frantic button mashing of a gamer, but the precise, deliberate motions of a surgeon. On the main screen, a single, almost imperceptible event occurred. A hostile icon, a sniper hidden in a window 3 blocks away from the main assault, an enemy Valerius's team would never have seen until it was too late, simply vanished. No muzzle flash, no sound on the comms. Just a clean, silent deletion. A technician in the back row leaned forward, squinting at his monitor. "Did you see that?" he whispered to his colleague. "Echo just took out the counter-sniper." The other technician shook his head. "Impossible. That a 1,200-meter cold-bore shot through a simulated crosswind. The algorithm barely gives it a 2% probability, but it had happened." A moment later, another hostile icon disappeared. This one was a spotter for a mortar team positioned on a rooftop, a team that was just seconds away from raining indirect fire down on the pinned-down assault force. Rostova's avatar hadn't moved. She was simply deleting threats. She wasn't just a sniper. She was an editor, redacting the enemy's advantages one by one. Valerius, still screaming into his mic, was oblivious. His team was now trapped in a central courtyard, a kill box of his own making. "We're pinned. I need support. Echo, where's my support?" he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. On screen, Rostova's calm, digitized voice came over the net for the first time. "Support is active." The response was so devoid of emotion, so utterly placid, that it was more chilling than any battle cry. In the next 30 seconds, a sequence of events unfolded that defied the simulation's programming. Rostova's shots became a symphony of precision. She wasn't just hitting targets, she was shaping the battlefield. A shot ricocheted off a steel girder to disable a heavy machine gunner hiding behind cover. Another punch through a thin interior wall to neutralize an enemy commander, causing his squad's AI to momentarily falter in confusion. She was exploiting fractional percentage probabilities, making shots that the system itself deemed impossible. She was no longer playing the game. She was rewriting its code in real time. The tide of the battle turned instantly. The pressure on Valerius's team evaporated. The once overwhelming enemy force was suddenly blind, disorganized, and leaderless. They walked through the rest of the building as if on a guided tour, encountering only confused, isolated hostiles. The simulation ended. On the main screen, the final score appeared in stark, white letters: scenario complete. Hostiles neutralized, 100%. Hostage casualties, 0%. Team casualties, 0%. Below it, a single line flashed, a line no one in that facility had ever seen before. Perfect execution. New records set. A deafening silence fell over the TOC. Valerius stared, his mouth hanging open. "No, no way," he stammered, his mind refusing to process the data. "That's not possible. The system is broken. It must be a glitch." Just as the word glitch left his lips, The main doors to the tactical operations center hissed open with a pneumatic finality that cut through the stunned silence. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was General Madsen, the base commander, his face a mask of cold granite. But he was not alone. Behind him, arrayed in a silent, intimidating phalanx, were more stars than Captain Valerius had ever seen in one place. There were generals from the Air Force, admirals from the Navy, senior commanders from SOCOM, and several severe-looking civilians in dark suits who radiated an aura of authority that transcended rank. There were not 20 of them, but there were enough to make the air in the room crackle with immense, suffocating pressure. They didn't stride in. They flowed, a river of command that parted around the consoles and came to a stop in the center of the room. None of them looked at Valerius. Their collective gaze, a laser of focused intensity, was fixed on one person, Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, who was calmly logging out of her simulation terminal. General Madsen walked forward, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. He stopped beside the lead technician. "Put her service file on the main screen," he commanded, his voice low but carrying the weight of absolute power. The technician fumbled, his fingers shaking as he typed. Rostova's file appeared. It was sparse, almost blank, filled with black bars of redaction. Name, Rostova, rank, Master Sergeant. Years of service, 28. "That's not her full file," Madsen said, not looking at the technician. "Use my authorization. Override code, Chimera Alpha," the technician typed in the code. For a second, the system seemed to hesitate, as if accessing something forbidden. Then the black bars dissolved. The screen repopulated with text, and a collective gasp went through the room. The information that flooded the screen was not a service record. It was the secret history of the last 30 years of American warfare. Name, Eva Rostova. Designation, Architect, 7, Project Metis. Unit, Special Activities Division, classified. Her real title wasn't Master Sergeant. That was a cover designation for administrative purposes. Her actual role was listed as Lead Designer and Chief Red Team Analyst for the very simulation they were in. She hadn't just played the Gordianaut scenario. She had designed it. She had written the code for the adaptive AI, choreographed every enemy ambush, and personally calibrated the probability engine that had deemed her own shots impossible. The list of her attached commendations scrolled down the screen, a litany of valor so extensive it seemed impossible for one person to have earned. The Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars, a bronze star with V. Device for every major conflict since the 90s, all awarded in classified ceremonies. Her combat skills were listed in cold, technical terms, master-level certification in over a dozen martial disciplines, expert in 17 small arms platforms, pioneer of predictive combat modeling. Valerius stared, his arrogance collapsing into a black hole of disbelief. This woman he had dismissed as a relic, an old-timer, was not just a soldier. She was a living legend, a ghost in the machine who had shaped the very doctrine he thought he was mastering. General Madsen walked slowly toward Rostova, the other flag officers parting before him. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, his posture ramrod straight. He did not offer a handshake or a casual word. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his movements crisp and precise, and rendered the sharpest, most profound salute Valerius had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory gesture between colleagues. It was an act of pure, unadulterated reverence. "Ma'am," General Madsen said, his voice ringing with a respect that bordered on awe. "My sincere apology for the reception you received on my base." One by one, the other generals and admirals followed his lead, each one saluting the quiet Master Sergeant. The room filled with the silent, powerful gesture of deference from the most powerful military leaders in the nation to the unassuming woman in the faded fatigues. Valerius felt the blood drain from his face. His career wasn't just over. His entire understanding of the world, of respect, of power, was being systematically dismantled before his eyes. Madsen finally lowered his salute and turned, his gaze falling upon Valerius for the first time. The general's eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were filled with a cold, devastating disappointment. "Captain," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow louder than any shout. "You did not just insult a master sergeant today. You did not just assault a superior officer, which in itself is a court-martial offense. You took a swing at a national treasure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Effective immediately, this entire base is under lockdown. All communications are cut. All training is suspended. I want you, your executive officer, and your entire command staff in my office in 5 minutes. You're going to explain to me, in excruciating detail, how you managed to be so profoundly, so catastrophically wrong." The story of what happened in the TOC, of the day the generals came, became known as the Chimera Protocol, despite the immediate communications blackout and the official classification of the event. The truth, as it often does, found ways to seep through the cracks. It was whispered in hushed tones in the barracks late at night, traded between technicians over secure channels, and pieced together by junior officers from the sudden, drastic changes in training doctrine. The legend grew with each retelling. They said Master Sergeant Rostova wasn't human, that she was a new form of AI in a human shell. They said she didn't aim her rifle. She simply told the bullets where to go. They said the simulation hadn't been a test for Captain Valerius's team, but a diagnostic run by Rostova to see if her creation was still challenging enough. The mythologizing served a purpose. It was easier to believe she was something supernatural than to accept the humbling reality that a single, quiet individual could possess such an immense depth of skill and wisdom, a depth that made the loudest boasts of arrogant men seem like the chirping of insects. The base lockdown lasted for 72 hours. During that time, every officer and NCO at the rank of Sergeant First Class and above was brought into a secure auditorium. General Madsen stood before them, and without naming names, he told them a story about a young captain who confused confidence with competence, and who judged a book not just by its cover, but by the fading of its ink. He spoke of the danger of assumptions and the institutional rot of arrogance. He made it clear that the incident was not just one man's failure, but a symptom of a culture he intended to purge. Captain Valerius was not court-martialed. Such a proceeding would have been too public, forcing Rostova's identity into the light. Instead, his punishment was far more refined, and in its own way more severe. He was stripped of his command and reassigned to the base's archives, the very place he had accused Rostova of belonging. His new duty was to read. He was assigned a single, monumental task: to study and compile a report on the complete, unredacted mission history and design philosophy of Architect 7. For 6 months, Valerius sat alone in a sterile, windowless room, surrounded by thousands of pages of data. He read the after-action reports from missions that officially never happened. He studied the tactical breakdowns of battles that had changed the course of history, all of them influenced, planned, or directly executed by the woman he had insulted. He saw her handwritten notes in the margins of doctrinal manuals, subtle corrections that had saved thousands of lives. He traced the evolution of the Gordian knot simulation, realizing it wasn't just a training tool, but a psychological profile designed to identify and expose the very brand of hubris he had displayed. It was a process of ego death by 1,000 paper cuts. He saw his own arrogance reflected back at him in the failures of others she had documented. He saw his own tactical blunders preemptively diagnosed in her writings. He was not just being punished, he was being meticulously, painstakingly re-educated. The process broke him down and then, slowly, began to rebuild him into something better. One afternoon, months into his penance, he saw her walking down a hallway. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. She was just returning a book to the library, her movements as quiet and unassuming as ever. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and walked towards her. He stopped and came to a rigid position of attention. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. I wanted to apologize for my conduct. There is no excuse for my words or my actions. I was ignorant, and I was wrong." Rostova stopped and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no satisfaction, no pity. There was only a calm, neutral assessment. She studied him for a long moment, then gave the same single economical nod she had given him in the TOC. All lessons have a cost, Captain, she said, her voice even and low. See that you learn this one. She then continued on her way, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, a humbled man who had finally begun to understand the vast difference between making noise and making a difference. The simulation chamber where it all happened was never officially renamed, but the trainees and staff all called it the same thing. The Chimera's cage, the screenshot of her perfect score, was framed and hung in the main briefing room, a silent, constant reminder of the day that competence spoke louder than any command. A year passed. The culture of the base had undergone a seismic shift. The old doctrine of speed and aggression had been replaced by the Chimera philosophy, a new training methodology that emphasized patience, precision, and foresight. The core tenet was simple: assumptions are a liability. Competence is silent. The Gordian knot simulation was now the first test every new officer had to face, not to pass it, but to fail it, and to learn from that failure. Captain Valerius was no longer in the archives. He had been given a second chance, a probationary role as an instructor at the academy. He was a changed man. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. His lectures were legendary, not for their bravado, but for their brutal honesty. He used his own failure, the unedited recording of the Chimera Protocol incident, as his primary teaching tool. He would play the entire event for the new lieutenants, forcing them to watch his own public humiliation. He would pause the video on the moment he tossed the data slate, his own face twisted in a mask of arrogant frustration. "Look at this man," he would tell the silent, sober-faced cadets. "Look at his certainty. Look at his pride. He believes he is the tip of the spear. He believes his voice is the loudest in the room, and that this makes him the strongest. He is wrong." Then he would fast forward to the footage of Rostova, her calm focus, her impossible shots. "Strength is not loud," he'd say, his voice filled with the conviction of a convert. "Strength is not fast. Strength is precise. It is deliberate. It is the absolute, unshakable confidence that comes from a mastery so profound it requires no announcement. The most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one you don't notice until it's too late." He had become the most effective instructor on the base, his personal shame forged into a powerful lesson for the next generation. Master Sergeant Rostova, or Architect 7, was rarely seen. She had no official office, no permanent station. She was a ghost, appearing occasionally to observe a training exercise or to speak in quiet tones with the R&D technicians, offering a subtle suggestion that would solve a month-long coding problem in a matter of minutes. Her legend was now institutional folklore, a foundational myth for all who passed through the base's gates. Newcomers were told the story not as a piece of gossip, but as a core lesson in military ethics. It taught them to look beyond the uniform, beyond the rank, beyond the superficial markers of authority, and to seek out true competence, which often resided in the quietest corners of the room. The legacy of that day was not in the punishment of one arrogant captain, but in the elevation of a timeless principle. It was a reminder that respect is not a function of volume, but of value. It was a testament to the fact that true professionals are defined not by the praise they receive, but by the standards they set. Their work is their voice. Their results are their validation. Rostova had never sought recognition or apology. It was irrelevant to her. Her reward was a safer, more effective fighting force. Her satisfaction came from seeing the principles she embodied: humility, discipline, and quiet competence take root and flourish in the institution she had dedicated her life to protecting. The story of the day the generals became a self-correcting mechanism, a living piece of code injected into the culture of the military, ensuring that the lesson of Captain Valerius would never have to be learned in such a brutal fashion again. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a file. It's what continues forward in the actions and attitudes of others, a silent, spreading ripple of excellence that endures long after the initial event has faded into memory. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth. Subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.